Hi, I'm Danica. My mother called me at 2 a.m. screaming, "You owe your sister your bone marrow, it's family." But when I opened the DNA results and said, "She's not my sister," the room went dead silent. They called me heartless for hesitating, but none of them asked why I paused. Not one of them knew that for 38 years, I've been the outsider, raised on a lie so big, it stole my childhood and handed it to someone else. And when I put the truth on the table, my own mother shredded it, in front of me. But before I say what I did next, tell me, what time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments, because this isn't just a story about family, it's about betrayal dressed up as love, and the moment I stopped bleeding for people who never saw me as blood. It was nearly 2:07 a.m. when the phone lit up beside my laptop, vibrating against the wooden desk with that quiet insistence I'd come to associate with dread. My fingers froze above the keyboard. The fellowship proposal deadline blinked in my browser tab, half finished and untouched for the past hour. The screen read, "Mom." Of course it did. I let it ring once more before picking up. "Hello?" Her voice came through tight and scratchy, like she hadn't cleared her throat, or like she'd been crying. "Danica, your sister's sick. It's serious." I didn't say anything. "She has leukemia. Aggressive. They say she needs a bone marrow transplant. You're the only match." Still, I said nothing. "Danica." Her voice cracked, and then sharpened. "Don't be heartless. This is your sister we're talking about." My chest tightened at that word. Sister. Seraphine. With her perfect skin, her practiced tears, her curated tragedies. The girl who once sent a complaint to my university dean claiming I'd falsified my research citations. Anonymously, of course, but I recognized the phrasing. Seraphine always did have a flair for melodrama and cruelty wrapped in silk. I stared at the cursor blinking on my screen, then said quietly, "Okay." "Okay, you'll do it?" I said okay, not yes. And I hung up. The room was too quiet after that. The only sound was the ticking wall clock and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of that call settle over me like dust. What do you do when the person who tried to ruin your life suddenly needs you to save theirs? You pause, you breathe, and then you wait to see just how far they'll go. I didn't want to go to the dinner that weekend. My name had only come up because my mother had called my father's side of the family, practically sobbing about how Danica's refusing to save her own sister. So when my Uncle Greg texted, "Hope you'll be at dinner. Seraphine needs the support," I knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Still, I went. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to see just how low they'd stoop this time. Maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't the monster they made me out to be. They hosted it at my parents' place in Aurora, just outside Denver, a comfortable 2-story colonial with manicured bushes and a wreath on the door that read, "Family is everything." I arrived 10 minutes early. No one greeted me. The front door was unlocked. Inside, laughter floated from the dining room. I stood at the threshold for a second, scanning the table. Everyone was there. Uncle Greg, Aunt Naomi, my cousin Trey and his wife, even cousin Mia, who lived 2 hours away. My father sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in hand. Seraphine sat across from him, wrapped in a blush-pink scarf that barely concealed her hair loss. She looked fragile, elegant, the tragic heroine. There were 11 place settings. I was the 12th person. I stood there, blinking at the empty space where my name card should have been. "Oh," Mom said, rising halfway. "Danica, you made it." I nodded, ignoring the fact that I was still holding my coat. "There's a folding chair in the kitchen," she added. Of course there was. I got it myself. Dinner started like nothing was wrong. Chatter about work, Mia's upcoming wedding, Trey's new job. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing. When I mentioned I had just submitted a research paper for peer review, my aunt smiled politely and changed the subject to Seraphine's new organic diet. Halfway through the main course, Mom cleared her throat dramatically. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. It means so much to Seraphine. We've all been through a lot." Seraphine dipped her head and gave a soft, rehearsed smile. Then Mom turned to me. "And Danica?" Her voice got tighter, more performative. "Well, we're still hoping she'll do the right thing, but she's always been independent, sometimes to a fault." Everyone looked at me. I kept chewing. "She's thinking about it," Mom continued like I wasn't in the room. "Of course, we all know family means sacrifice." Uncle Greg chimed in, "You don't turn your back on blood, not when it matters." My father said nothing. His fork clinked softly against his plate. I swallowed, set my fork down gently, and stood. "Excuse me," I said. "Danica," Mom started. "No," I said louder this time. "I'm done." I walked past the table, past Seraphine's downcast eyes and my father's empty stare. No one moved to stop me. No one called out. At the door, I paused for half a breath. So this is what family means to them, I thought. They had pushed me too far, and I was finally ready to push back. I didn't drive home that night. I floated. It wasn't exhaustion. It wasn't sadness either. It was a strange numbness, like my body had shut off everything non-essential just to get me from point A to B. From the dinner table where I didn't exist to the apartment I paid for on my own. From being labeled heartless to remembering why I'd built a life as far from theirs as I could. I parked in front of my building, sat in the car with the engine still running, and stared through the windshield. The reflection of my own face stared back at me in the glass, hollowed out by years of trying to make peace with people who called it war. Upstairs, I flicked on the lights and tossed my purse onto the entryway bench. Everything was in its place. My books, my notes, the paperbacks I never finished. I moved on autopilot, kicking off my heels, unzipping my coat, until I passed the hallway shelf and stopped short. The photo album. It had been sitting there for years. Mom had made it for my 30th birthday, just memories, she'd said. I'd never opened it again after that night. But now something pulled me toward it. I sat cross-legged on the living room floor and flipped it open. Page after page, there she was. Seraphine. Baby pictures, dance recitals, pageant dresses, a dozen snapshots of her blowing out birthday candles. Me? I was in the background, holding the cake, clapping from the sidelines, a blurry arm in the corner of the frame. And then, there it was, a picture from when I was 6. Seraphine had just gotten her own bedroom, complete with new wallpaper and a twin canopy bed. I stood in the hallway, watching her grin for the camera, holding the keys to her big girl room. I remembered how Mom had leaned down that day and whispered, "Let her shine, Danica. You're strong enough to share." I closed the album gently. I wasn't angry anymore. I was curious. Something had always felt off. Different blood types. Nurses making quiet comments at school checkups. That one time I needed stitches and Dad's face turned pale when they asked about allergies in the family. He'd stared at Mom, not at me. She answered for both of them. Now I couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe this wasn't just about resentment. Maybe it was about identity. Maybe I had the right to know who I even was. The next morning, after barely sleeping, I called a private DNA testing service. They didn't ask many questions, just gave me the address of a walk-in clinic that could take discrete samples and instructions on how to gather materials myself. I didn't need to look far. Seraphine had stayed with me once after a spa retreat. I still had her old hairbrush stashed in a drawer under the sink. My own was easy enough. The swabs arrived 2 days later. I mailed the kit from a drop box 3 towns over. I didn't tell a soul. Not Eden, my best friend. Not my coworker. Not even the mirror. If I'm expected to save her life, I whispered into the quiet, I deserve to know the truth about mine. The waiting stretched, like string pulled too tight. Days passed in fragments, work meetings, groceries, watering the aloe on the windowsill, pretending like my entire childhood wasn't hanging in the balance inside a manila envelope somewhere in the mail. On the 7th day, it came. I opened the door expecting a package from the university bookstore. Instead, there was a white envelope addressed in a clean sans-serif font. I knew before I even opened it. I stood in the kitchen with the envelope in my hand. My thumb hesitated on the seal, then I ripped it. 2 pages, a lot of technical terms, but the words that mattered were clear, bolded near the bottom. Probability of full sibling relationship, 0%. I let out a single breath, shaky and short. Not shock, confirmation. I sank into the kitchen chair and let the paper rest on the table like it was something breakable. I stared at it for a long time, my mind quiet for once. Seraphine wasn't my sister. Not by blood, and never by choice. They had spent my whole life telling me I was selfish, ungrateful, difficult. But maybe the real story wasn't about a daughter who didn't love enough. Maybe it was about a mother who had lied from the beginning. I leaned back, hands resting on the edge of the chair, letting the silence settle again. But if she wasn't my sister, then whose daughter was she? If she wasn't my sister, then whose daughter was she? That question lodged itself in my chest and didn't budge. Not through the rest of the night. Not even after I tried distracting myself with laundry, a lukewarm shower, and the mindless comfort of late-night public television. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, playing years of memories on a loop, moments I'd dismissed, now rearranged like puzzle pieces with new edges. By morning, I had a plan. Not a confrontation. Not yet. That wasn't how my mother worked, and if I wanted answers, I had to ask the kind of questions she didn't see coming. So I did something I hadn't done in months. I called her and asked if I could stop by. "Just groceries," I said. "Thought I'd bring you a few things." She hesitated. Then, "Well, if you're already out." That was her way of saying yes without sounding grateful. It was familiar. 40 minutes later, I was walking up the stone path of my parents' split-level home. The shutters had faded in the sun, and the mailbox still leaned slightly to the left. A few yellow tulips poked through the front yard mulch. Seraphine's favorite, not mine. Mom met me at the door. No hug, just a once-over glance and a brief nod at the bag in my hand. "You didn't have to get almond milk. Your father's cholesterol is fine now," she said, already walking back inside. I followed her into the kitchen. Same worn countertops, same ticking clock above the fridge. I placed the groceries on the island and began unpacking slowly, letting the silence do some of the work. "I've been reading this study," I started casually, "about how genetic traits are passed down, blood types, recessive markers, stuff like that." She didn't look up from folding a dish towel. "Oh?" she said, neutral. "Yeah. Turns out blood types can actually prove parentage in some cases. Like, if 2 parents have O-negative blood, there's no way their kid could be AB." Her hands paused, then continued folding. "Science is always changing," she muttered. "Back in my day, we didn't rely on all these fancy tests. We just loved each other." I offered a soft smile. "Still, sometimes I wonder about that. All the random allergies I had as a kid. That time the school nurse said something didn't add up." She dropped the towel into the drawer with a sharp thud. "Why are you always digging into things that don't matter, Danica?" There it was. I shrugged. "Just curiosity, I guess. You know how my brain works." She didn't answer. I let the conversation drift to safer ground. Weather, the grocery bill, the new neighbor's ugly mailbox. But inside, my mind was a hammer, and every word she didn't say was a crack in the wall she'd spent decades building. By the time I left, my resolve had hardened into something cold and precise. There was only one person I trusted with keeping secrets, and he hadn't spoken much since the divorce: my father. But there was a storage unit. When I was in college, Dad had listed me as an alternate contact on a storage locker he used for keeping tax boxes and holiday junk. I'd forgotten about it until I was sorting old emails one night and found the automated notice from the rental company. "Payment due by 25th. Contact Danica E. Marrow." It took one phone call and a key code to get in. The place smelled like dust and old glue. Rows of steel units, quiet and cold. I found the one labeled 1167 and opened it with a soft metallic groan. Inside, chaos. Cardboard boxes stacked in uneven piles. Faded labels, a broken wreath hanger, an old family printer. I pulled a stool from the corner and began digging. 3 boxes in, I found the folder. Manila, water-stained, but intact. Inside, school photos, report cards, handwritten Christmas cards from relatives I barely remembered. A wedding invitation from 1988. Then, tucked inside a plain white envelope, something that made my stomach lurch. A Polaroid. Mom. Younger, softer, her hair still thick and brown. And beside her, a man I didn't recognize. He had dark eyes, olive skin, and wore a white coat open over jeans. They were standing just outside a hospital's double doors, her head leaned slightly on his shoulder, a smile so unguarded I almost didn't recognize it on her face. On the back, scribbled in Mom's looping handwriting, Dr. Raphael, thank you for everything. That was the first time I felt like I'd entered someone else's story, someone else's truth, one I was never supposed to read. I sat on the edge of the unit floor, concrete hard under my legs, and let the silence press in. The name, the body language, the year. Seraphine would have been born that fall. I placed the photo back inside the envelope and slid it into my coat pocket. The sun was setting as I left the unit. Gold spilled across the parking lot, hitting the windshield of my car with a slow, reflective burn. I drove without music, windows slightly cracked, letting the April air fill the space I couldn't. Back home, I poured a glass of water, sat at my desk, and opened a fresh file on my laptop. I titled it in bold, Family Rewritten. Then I typed the first line. This isn't about Seraphine. It's about the lie they all agreed to believe. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Seraphine's lie. It was about the entire foundation we'd been raised on. That night, I couldn't shake the photo from my mind. My mother, barely older than I was now, pressed into the chest of a man I'd never met, under the pale green glow of a hospital sign. Dr. Raphael, the caption whispered. Thank you for everything. Not thank us, not thank you both. Just you. I opened a map and zoomed in on Austin, Texas. The hospital still existed. Same name, same campus. The next morning, I requested time off from the university under the pretense of a research conference in Houston. Close enough. A few clicks later, I had a flight, a car rental, and 2 nights booked in a modest downtown hotel. 2 days after finding that photo, I was stepping out of an airport shuttle into the sharp sun of Austin. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I walked toward the hospital's administration wing, my blazer sticking slightly in the late morning humidity. I had rehearsed my story on the plane. I was writing a piece on local healthcare legacies for an academic journal. Half-truths were always easier to carry. Inside, the air conditioning hit me like a wall. The receptionist wore pink reading glasses and greeted me with a practiced smile. I showed her a fake university press card and asked to speak with someone who handled staff records from the late 80s. She looked skeptical. That's over 30 years ago. I know, I replied, layering in just enough breathlessness to sell the story. It's a legacy piece, not urgent, just meaningful. She led me down a corridor to a small window where a woman in her 60s glanced up from behind a stack of binders. Looking for ghosts? She asked dryly. I gave a soft laugh. Maybe. She pulled out a dusty drawer, her fingers moving like she'd done this 1,000 times. Name? Dr. Raphael Ortiz. She paused. He was here. Pediatrics, I think. Only a couple years. Left around 89. Do you know if he's still practicing? The woman tilted her head. No idea. But I remember him. Kind eyes. Everyone liked him. Shame he left so quick. I thanked her, left a tip on the desk that she pretended not to notice, and walked out with a name, a city, and a date. I didn't know what I expected to find, but I wasn't turning back. Back at the hotel, I searched online until I found him. Raphael Ortiz, MD, retired, still living in Austin. He had spoken at a children's wellness symposium just 2 years prior. There was a contact form attached to a consulting profile. I hesitated, then typed, Dear Dr. Ortiz, I'm a writer working on a project about long-term impacts of pediatric care. Would you be open to a short meeting over coffee to discuss your legacy in Texas medical circles? I clicked send and tried not to feel like a fraud. He responded that evening. Yes, I'm free tomorrow morning. Cafe Verde, 10 a.m. The next morning, I dressed simply. No jewelry, hair pulled back, neutral tones. I didn't want to look like someone with an agenda. I wanted to look harmless. The cafe was tucked under the canopy of a live oak. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and roasted beans. I spotted him immediately. He was older now, with a neatly trimmed beard and silver hair, but the eyes were the same, brown, gentle, so painfully familiar I had to look down at the floor for a moment before approaching. "Dr. Ortiz?" I asked, offering my hand. He stood. "Yes. And you must be Ms. Monroe?" I nodded. We ordered coffee, black for him, chai for me, and sat near a window where morning light filtered through sheer curtains. He was polite, if cautious, answering questions about his years in medicine, the shift from practice to policy, the joys and frustrations of working in pediatrics. I let the small talk settle before steering the conversation. "There's one name I came across in the hospital's old photo logs. Mary Beth Myers. Did you know her?" The moment the name left my lips, everything shifted. His coffee cup paused mid-air. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but in memory. "She was a nurse, I believe, very bright." "And?" He placed the cup down gently. "She worked with me briefly. Then she left. No notice, just vanished. Someone said she'd gotten pregnant, but no one confirmed anything. Why are you asking?" I folded my hands. My voice dropped lower. "Because I believe the child was my sister, and she was born the year after you last saw Mary Beth." The silence between us thickened. He blinked slowly, processing. "You're not the sister?" "No," I said flatly. "I'm the other daughter, the one no one ever bragged about." He stared out the window, fingers pressed together. "She never told me." I believed him. He looked genuinely stunned, like someone who had spent decades wondering if a door would ever open again, only to learn it had been bricked over behind his back. I slid a napkin across the table. On it, my number. "You might want to talk to your daughter," I said, rising from the table, "before it's too late." He looked at the number, then up at me. "What's her name?" "Seraphine," I said. "Seraphine Myers." His lips parted like he might speak again, but I didn't stay to listen. That afternoon I boarded a flight home. The plane wasn't full, just a scattering of solo travelers, business types, a few families with toddlers and oversized headphones. Across the aisle, a little boy leaned into his mother's arm. She smiled and kissed the top of his head. My throat clenched. That had never been us. My mother had kept Seraphine close, like something precious and breakable. I'd always been expected to stand tall, stay out of the way, and not ask for too much. She was the chosen one, even though she came from a lie. I was the loyal one, and I was treated like a stranger. I pulled out my laptop, opened the family rewritten file, and created a new folder, Confession. Inside, I dropped a single note. "She built a life on omission. I won't." I looked out the window, clouds drifting beneath us like a soft, distant truth. Because if my mother wouldn't tell the truth, I would make her hear it. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give her time to rehearse, spin, or deflect. I needed to see her face, unfiltered, unrehearsed, when I laid everything bare. The drive to the old house felt shorter than it used to, maybe because I wasn't coming with hope this time, just proof. Their porch looked the same, peeling paint, the wind chimes still tangled from last winter's storm. I knocked once, then twice. The door opened a crack. My mother's eyes narrowed when she saw me. "Danica, we weren't expecting you." "I know," I said. "That's the point." She hesitated, then stepped aside. "Your sister's resting. She just had her treatment yesterday." I walked in without responding. The living room smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. Seraphine's blanket was draped over the recliner, a mug half full of chamomile tea resting beside it. I glanced at the hallway. Her door was closed. "Let's talk in the kitchen." My mother nodded stiffly and followed. I waited until she sat down, then pulled a manila envelope from my tote bag. I placed it on the table between us like a dealer laying down a final hand. She didn't reach for it. "What is that?" she asked. "Proof," I replied. "Of everything." She stared at it, then up at me. "Danica, if this is about that DNA thing again—" "It's not a thing," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "It's a fact you buried for decades." I opened the envelope and slid out the documents, Raphael's letter, the photo, the DNA test results. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't touch any of them. "I don't know what fantasy you've let yourself spiral into, but your sister, she's not my sister," I said, slicing through her words like glass. "Not by blood, not by truth, and you know it." A beat of silence, then she exhaled sharply. "So what? You think this is the time to play detective? When Seraphine is ill? When the only thing she needs is your marrow and your decency?" I tilted my head. Decency? Coming from the woman who lied to everyone, including her own husband, for 30 years. Her voice rose. "You are being cruel, vindictive. You've always had this bitterness. I used to think it was just you trying to prove something, but this is just hateful." I didn't flinch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I thought you might say that," I murmured. With one tap, Raphael's voice filled the kitchen. "It was 1988. She worked in my unit briefly. We were closer than we should have been. Then she was gone. No forwarding address. I didn't even know she was pregnant." The recording played on, calm and clear. My mother's hands began to tremble. She clutched the edge of the table like it might ground her. "You recorded him?" "Yes," I said, "because you've never told the truth unless someone cornered you with it." Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time the cracks showed. Not the cracks she wanted me to see, but the ones she couldn't hide. Her mouth parted, then closed again. She looked older than I remembered. "I was scared," she finally whispered. "Back then I had nothing. Your father, he wanted a perfect family. I thought if he knew, he'd leave. And I couldn't do it alone." I stared at her. "And what about me?" I asked quietly. "You didn't think I deserved the truth? That maybe the girl you kept in the shadows for so long had a right to know why she never quite fit into the picture-perfect frame?" She looked at me with something I couldn't quite name. Remorse, maybe, or just fatigue. I let the silence hang, then I reached into my bag one more time and set down a folder. "What's this?" "A written confession. 3 copies. One for you, one for Dad, and one for the hospital's legal department, if it comes to that." Her face blanched. "I'm not here to ruin your life," I continued, "but I'm also not going to donate bone marrow to someone who isn't my sister just because you refuse to own what you did." Her lip quivered. "So you'll let her die?" "I said I'd consider it," I replied. "If you tell the truth, publicly. You don't get to rewrite history just because it's inconvenient now." I slid a small notepad across the table. "You have 72 hours. If you sign it, we talk about the next step. If not, this story doesn't stay between us." Her fingers hovered over the paper, trembling. "You're blackmailing your own mother." I looked her in the eye. "No. I'm finally giving you a choice." The back door creaked behind us. We both turned. My father stood there, holding a bag of groceries, his face pale. He had heard everything, but I didn't stay. I turned, walked past the recliner where Seraphine still slept in her silk scarf and soft glow, and stepped into the sunlight. I gave them a deadline. What they did with it would change everything. I didn't sleep the night before the deadline, not because I was unsure, but because I already knew what would happen. Silence was an answer, and their silence had spoken volumes. That morning, I woke up before the sun, brewed black coffee, not because I needed the caffeine, but because routine gave me clarity. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the folder labeled Evidence. I had already redacted names, blurred out addresses. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Truth without blood on it. The blog I chose, medicalethicsmatters.org, was one I'd followed quietly for years. They handled whistleblower cases delicately, with nuance and care. I didn't need drama. I needed daylight. By 9:42 a.m., the article was submitted under the alias D. Martin. Title: When the Family Tree Lies, a researcher's private discovery of paternity fraud. I closed the laptop and took a deep breath. The sky was a clean shade of blue outside, like nothing had changed. But by noon, everything had. The blog published the piece within 3 hours. It exploded across Reddit, X, formerly Twitter, and Facebook groups dedicated to family rights and medical consent. The anonymity didn't last long. Someone found a Colorado University research photo of me on an old grant website. "Is this the whistleblower?" one tweet read. The rest was wildfire. Comments flooded in, half appalled, half fascinated. Paternity fraud, bone marrow guilt trips, inheritance manipulation. People had stories of their own, some messier, some eerily similar. By dinner, the local news was hinting, a shocking case of DNA deception may be unfolding in Boulder. One academic has reportedly uncovered. And then came Seraphine. She posted a curated carousel of childhood photos on Instagram. Us in matching pajamas, her in recital dresses, me clapping in the front row. The caption read, "Sometimes the people who smile at your successes are the ones who resent you most. I'm fighting for my life and someone I trusted is trying to destroy my family in the process." Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. "Stay strong, Queen. Jealousy is a disease." Then she went further. In a post to her 15K followers, she wrote, "Some people would rather break glass than admit they were never the center of attention, even if it means publicly humiliating their own blood. I won't play along." Attached was a blurry photo of me from college, taken after a campus mental health seminar. The caption insinuated instability, without saying a word directly. The blow landed. I felt it in my chest, not because I believed her, but because I knew thousands would. Then Mary Beth joined the act. In a short clip on a local news segment, she sat calmly in her living room, pearls around her neck like armor. "Every family has secrets," she said softly. "But dragging them into the public eye doesn't heal anyone, it just spreads the wound. No apology, no accountability, just polished deflection. And the public, they ate it up. My inbox filled with strangers calling me bitter, vindictive. Ungrateful daughter outs mother to feel important. Someone even emailed the University Board of Ethics, demanding I be professionally evaluated. By the end of the week, the dean's office sent a polite but pointed message. "We're requesting clarification on your involvement in the recent media activity related to the blog article titled, 'When the Family Tree Lies.'" That night, I turned off all notifications, closed every tab, pushed my phone deep into the kitchen drawer like it might bite. Then I sat in the dark with my laptop open, the cursor blinking in a folder I hadn't named until now. War. I opened a blank document, began organizing everything. The DNA test, Raphael's voice recording, the blog metrics, screenshots of the posts and their timestamps, even the messages I received. Evidence wasn't just truth, it was pattern. But I didn't send anything. Not yet. Instead, I wrote one sentence into a new email draft and stared at it for a while. "Let's meet." No threats, no drama, just an invitation, and I sent it. Because sometimes the strongest move isn't shouting louder, it's setting the stage and letting them step into the light. The morning of the meeting, I woke up before sunrise. Not because of nerves, those had already worn thin days ago, but because my body couldn't rest with the weight of what was coming. I dressed with care. Nothing flashy, nothing submissive, just a navy blouse, pressed slacks, and a pair of flats that made no sound on hardwood floors. On my kitchen table sat a single folder, labeled in black ink. Truth. Inside, printouts, test results, Raphael's notarized statement, screenshots of Seraphine's smear campaign, and a formal agreement I'd spent the last 2 nights drafting. I didn't eat breakfast, just brewed coffee, let it go cold, and stared out the window until it was time to leave. The mediation center sat tucked between a dentist's office and a law firm, neutral, bland, clinical. Exactly what I needed. I arrived 10 minutes early. Harper was already in the waiting room, giving me a quiet nod. "You okay?" she asked, handing me a bottle of water. I don't need them to apologize, I said, gripping the folder. I just need the truth to exist somewhere other than my own mind. By 10 past, everyone had arrived. Mary Beth walked in first, clutching her bag like a weapon. Seraphine followed, in designer sunglasses, despite the cloudy sky, arms folded like a child dragged into church. Raphael entered last. He nodded at me once, said nothing, and took his seat at the end of the oval table. His silence felt heavier than any accusation. The mediator gave a brief statement about confidentiality and civility, and then it was my turn. I slid the folder into the center of the table and opened it. "This," I said, "is the story you tried to bury." No one moved. I handed out copies. Seraphine flipped through hers with dramatic detachment. Mary Beth didn't touch hers. "The DNA tests confirm what I suspected," I continued. "Seraphine and I are not biological sisters. Rafael Ortiz is her father, and I am not." Mary Beth exhaled sharply. "Danica, this obsession of yours, it's cruel. Your sister's sick, and you want to humiliate her like this?" "She's not my sister," I said flatly. "And this isn't about cruelty. It's about ending the rewrite you've been performing for decades." Seraphine scoffed. "So what? You're going to air this out to the world? For what? Some moral victory?" "No, for restoration," I said. I pulled out a single-page contract. "If both of you sign this and agree to publicly acknowledge the truth, I'll authorize the Marrow donation." Mary Beth laughed, a bitter, rasping sound. "You think this is leverage? Who do you think you are?" I said nothing. I didn't need to. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and pressed play. Raphael's voice filled the room, calm, clear, undeniable. "Yes, I had a relationship with Mary Beth Myers in 1988. I didn't know she was pregnant until recently. She disappeared. I never got the chance to know Seraphine, but I believe she has a right to the truth." Silence followed. Mary Beth's face paled, her mouth opened, then closed. She slumped into her chair, blinking fast. Then Seraphine stood up, eyes blazing. "Fine. You want the truth?" "I knew. I've known since I was 17. Her voice cracked. "Mom told me after my first hospital scare. She said it didn't change anything, said I should never, ever tell anyone, especially you." I stared at her, barely breathing. "I let them blame you for everything," she whispered. "When I couldn't keep up in school, when I lost that fellowship, even when Mom said you should have been the one taking care of her." I said nothing. Her shoulders dropped. "I forged those emails. The ones that got you flagged at your university. I needed a win. You were always so put together." Harper leaned forward, jaw tight. "You tried to destroy her career." "I didn't think she'd fight back," Seraphine said, tears pooling now. "I thought she'd just take it, like always." I slid the document back toward her. "This is your chance, not just for me, for you too. You want to stop pretending? Start here." Raphael spoke then, his voice low, furious. "You used my child to destroy another." The room froze. He stood up, walked to the window, then turned. "I don't want revenge. I want acknowledgement." He looked at me. "And maybe one day a second chance." I nodded, throat tight. Back at the table, 2 pens lay beside the agreement. They both reached for one, but only one of them signed. Mary Beth's hand hovered over the pen, fingers twitching, eyes darting across the words like they were barbed wire. Seraphine had already signed, no hesitation, no fanfare. Her signature, small and unsteady, sat at the bottom of the page, just above the date. A tiny mark of surrender. I waited. Mary Beth finally pushed back her chair with a slow scrape that cut through the room. "No," she said, folding her arms. "I won't be humiliated for your bitterness." She didn't shout. She didn't cry. Her voice was calm, controlled, which made the sting land harder. Raphael shifted slightly in his chair, watching her, jaw clenched. Harper sat frozen beside me, one hand resting over her mouth, as if even her breath might break the room apart. "I carried this family," Mary Beth continued, voice flat. "I kept it from falling apart. And this? This is how you repay me?" I said nothing. There was nothing left to explain. She grabbed the unsigned copy, tore it clean down the center, and dropped the pieces onto the table. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her checkbook, and tossed it next to the shredded contract. "That's for the utilities on the Boulder house," she said. "Don't ever contact me again. You're dead to me." The door clicked behind her like a verdict. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It buzzed with everything unspoken: betrayal, resentment, grief. Seraphine shifted slightly, head low. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then her body jerked. Her eyes rolled back. She gasped, like the air had been yanked from her lungs, and before I could move, she collapsed sideways in the chair. "Seraphine!" Harper leapt up, catching her just in time to keep her from hitting the floor. Raphael was already dialing, his voice sharp but controlled. "Yes, mediation center on 28th, cardiac distress, female, mid-30s, now." I knelt down beside Seraphine, my hands hovering just above her, unsure where to touch, how to help. Her skin had gone clammy, a pale sheen crawling up her forehead. She opened her eyes just long enough to meet mine, then they fluttered shut again. The paramedics arrived fast. Too fast. Maybe someone in the building heard the panic and called too. We rode in silence to the hospital, sirens slicing through the static in my chest. At the ICU, I paced. Harper sat near the vending machine, head bowed over her phone. Raphael stood by the window, arms crossed. No one spoke. Even the hospital air felt heavy with consequence. A doctor stepped into the hallway, pulling down his mask. "She's in critical condition," he said gently. "Her body's failing faster than expected. If she doesn't receive the transplant in the next 24 hours, she won't survive." I nodded. It was the only thing I could do. In the dim light of the ICU room, Seraphine looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her body, hooked up to machines, looked fragile in a way that felt like betrayal. This was the same woman who had weaponized attention, who could twist a dinner table into a stage. And now she looked like a child who had run out of stories to hide behind. Her eyes fluttered open as I stepped closer. "You came," she whispered. I sat down. "Of course I did." She blinked slowly. "I never expected forgiveness." I stayed quiet. "But thank you for giving me this last chance," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't answer. Not with words. I reached into my bag, pulled out the surgical release forms the nurse had handed me earlier, and signed them without looking away from her. I wasn't doing it for her. I was doing it for the girl I used to be, the one who once stayed up making flashcards for a sister who mocked her spelling, the one who believed that truth mattered, that integrity counted for something, the girl who got left behind and who deserved to be seen. Finally. As I handed the forms to the nurse, she gave me a nod and disappeared down the hallway. The gurney arrived minutes later to wheel Seraphine toward surgery. I stood at the edge of the corridor, watching as they turned the corner. The operating room was cold, but my resolve was colder. The sterile scent hit me first, then the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, steady and soft. I blinked through the haze and saw Raphael sitting near the foot of my bed, holding a bouquet of white tulips, my favorite, not that I'd ever told him. He stood as I stirred, voice low. "Welcome back." I nodded slowly, my throat dry. "How long?" "Just over 24 hours. Surgery went well. They said you were strong." He paused. "She's stable. For now." The tulips shook slightly in his hand as he passed them to me. There was no card. I glanced around. No other flowers, no balloons, no Mary Beth. I leaned my head back against the pillow. Some silences don't need to be broken. He sat again, lips pressed into a line of tired grace. Neither of us spoke for a long while. By the time I was discharged, the clouds had shifted. It rained briefly on the drive home, just enough to streak the windshield without needing the wipers. I took it as a quiet reset, a clean breath. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. I had just finished a slow walk around the block, my body still sore, but my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. Seraphine stood on the porch, thinner, pale, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big. She didn't wear makeup. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. No cameras, no statement pieces, just her. In one hand, she held a manila folder, in the other, a frame, wooden, worn, and familiar. "Can I come in?" she asked. I didn't answer. I stepped aside. We sat in silence for a minute on the couch. She placed the folder between us first. "I wanted you to have a signed copy, in case you ever need it again. Public record, notarized. It's real." I nodded once. Then she handed me the photo frame. Us, as kids, no filters, no red eyes removed or edges trimmed. Just 2 little girls, muddy and grinning, holding popsicles in the summer sun. "I can't fix the past," Seraphine whispered, her eyes still on the photo. "But I won't lie about it anymore. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see what I had." I let her words hang in the air. "No, it's okay. No warm reconciliation. I didn't have it in me, and she didn't ask for it." Instead, she stood up slowly, winced, and looked at me one last time. "You deserved better," she said, "from all of us." I didn't follow her to the door, I just watched it close behind her. The envelope came a week later, plain white, no return address, but I recognized the seal, my old university. Inside, a letter. "We apologize for the premature termination of your academic affiliation. After further review and external clarification, we are reinstating your name and inviting you to return as a guest lecturer this fall." I held the letter in my hands for a long time. Then I folded it, slid it into my coat pocket, and walked. The park wasn't far. There, beneath the same elm tree where Dad used to sit beside me during long summer afternoons, I unfolded the frame Seraphine left behind. Tucked inside the backing was a note, written in small, uneven cursive. "You were the real sister all along. I just didn't know how to love you right." The wind rustled the leaves overhead, sending a cascade of yellow across my lap. I leaned back, closing my eyes to the breeze. I wasn't heartless. I was just tired of bleeding for people who only knew how to take. And in that moment, beneath the mountains, under a sky that didn't ask anything of me, I remembered who I was. Before the guilt, before the manipulation, before the lies that turned love into leverage. I didn't save her to feel like a sister again. I saved her because I finally remembered who I was, before they told me I wasn't enough.